Hello there. I hope you are well, and if you've been following along, welcome back. It's good to be back, and today we're going to be continuing on in Chapter 5, which means that the last episode, we took a look at right speech, and today we'll be taking a look at right action, which were coupled in this chapter. Yeah, and I talked a little bit about why that is in the last episode, but yes, welcome. And my name is Sarah, and you're most welcome here. And I am reading the book On the Path, an anthology on the Noble Eightfold Path, drawn from the Pāli Canon. And this book was written by Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, an American Buddhist monk, and he is widely respected for his translations of Buddhist texts and his teaching on meditation and the Dhamma. And his works are deeply rooted in the Theravāda Buddhist tradition, emphasizing a direct, practical approach to the Buddhist teachings. And again, I just want to reiterate, thank you, Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu, for making this book freely available to anybody out there who's interested in Buddhism and would like to read in my view, obviously, a really excellent book, but also putting it in the Creative Commons so that people like me can do projects like this, read the book and disseminate the audio without having to pay royalties. So thanks so much for that. I don't know if I've ever explicitly stated this before. I don't know that it maybe has ever occurred to me until now. I think I might have in a more subtle way, but perhaps I'll just say more directly that this particular project of mine is never a pushing against. Although I have my pushing against in relationship to the ways in which Buddhism was refashioned in the West. But when it comes to a life path, when it comes to a way of living in the world, one's perception of what it means to be alive in relationship to others, in relationship to the self, to my view, Buddhism is a path. It's a very explicit path. You read the stuff, you read the books, etc. It's a path that works for me. I think even Siddhartha Gautama, who became the Buddha, also said, hey, this path isn't for everybody. It's just a path. And it is a difficult path. Well, I don't like that word difficult. I mean, it's a very, not everybody maybe likes this idea. That's okay. Every mind is different. Every body is different in relationship to this, but I find this path has been very helpful for me. And yeah, I think, if and when people kind of get past the kind of westernization of Buddhism, and they kind of sink into the contextual teachings themselves, and, that can look like a lot of things. People will suggest it's nihilistic, which is inaccurate, a misunderstanding of the often overused and usually misquoted life is suffering, completely misunderstanding that in the context of how it was taught to scholars' knowledge back in the old-timey days. Misunderstanding detachment, and presuming that it means indifference or just sort of checking out, none of which any of those represent the actual Buddhist path that Siddhartha Gautama, who would later become the Buddha, taught. And, speaking of all of that, we are landing squarely in ethics in this book because Buddhism is wholly grounded in ethics and a particular ethical framework called the Eightfold Path. And we've been looking at the 5 precepts, or we will continue to look at the 5 precepts in Buddhism. And the one that we've been looking at here over the last week is right speech. Right speech. So refraining from lying, from idle chatter, or what was the word that he uses? It's such a great shopkeeper. Well, you can go back and reread it or listen to last episode, but how he describes, idle chatter, people gossiping in the square. I spent quite a bit of time last episode talking about how that's really a great albatross for me, is needing to be mindful about when I've slipped out of my sort of natural kind of straight shooting ways into something that could savor of unkind or dismissive or just, trying to pay attention. If we have the thought, I can pay attention, then if we can catch it and do that. And if we don't have the thought, then we don't have the thought. We can only do what we can do. It's also cutting ourselves some slack. I feel like I'm actually making zero sense. So, having said all of that, we are going to pick up in the book here, and we are still in chapter 5, and we did wrap up right speech last episode, and we are picking up with the rest of the chapter in this episode, and that is right action. And again, I'm looking forward to hearing the Buddha's explanation for why, or I should say, rather, Theravāda Bhikkhu, the translator and writer of this book, his reasons for putting right speech and right action together in one chapter. Okay, so we are picking up, if you have the free book, which if you expand out the comments here, you'll see a link to that book. And if you download that, I know for me, it comes out in my PDF here at the top of page 283. Right action. Right action is defined as abstaining from 3 types of wrong action: taking life, stealing, and sexual misconduct. Like the telling of lies, all of these types of wrong action have corresponding precepts in the 5 lay precepts, which means that they are to be absolutely avoided in all situations. Taking life means intentionally killing any animate being, human beings, animals, even insects. The Vinaya's discussion of its training rules against killing human beings and animals show that to count as wrong action, the act of taking life would have to involve knowing that the being was a being and that your act would kill it. And here we have PR, I'm going to assume precept. I'll find out more soon enough here. PR3 and PC61, says Ṭhānissaro Bhikkhu. In other words, if you stepped on an ant thinking that it was a spot of dirt, that would not count as taking life. The Vinaya also shows that to qualify as an animate being, the being would have to be big enough to see with the naked eye. For this reason, intentionally killing bacteria would not count as wrong action. The motivation for killing, however, is not a mitigating factor here. This means that acts of euthanasia and putting animals out of their misery, even though motivated by a misguided sense of compassion, misguided in the sense that you don't really know what awaits the person or animal after death, would count as wrong action too. Oh, I have so much to say about that. I might get kicked out of the Buddhism club. That's okay. We'll see. The firmness with which the Buddha regards the need to abstain from killing is illustrated in Sutta 183, where the question gives him the opportunity to allow for exceptions of any sort to the principle against killing. But he responds simply by saying that the one thing whose killing he condones is anger. Stealing means taking objects for one's own in the manner of theft, knowing that they have an owner who has not given permission to take them. The Vinaya's discussion of its training rule against stealing shows that it does not cover borrowing with the intent to return, nor does it cover taking things from nature or the environment in general. And here he has in parentheses again, PR2. The owner has to be a specific person or group of people with, quote, person meaning human being, or an inhabitant of the higher realms. Again, we will pick that apart here in just a little bit. Sexual misconduct is defined in the texts from the man's point of view and covers having sexual intercourse with those who are protected by their families, i.e. minors, those protected by their Dhamma, i.e. those who have taken a vow of celibacy, those with husbands, those who entail punishments, i.e. members of a king's harem. Ooh, can't wait to pick that one apart. And even those who are crowned with flowers by another man, i.e. those who are not formally married but who are going steady or in a committed relationship. From this list, it is possible to extrapolate similar standards for women. In one of the descriptions of the Noble Path, Sutta 46, the phrase abstaining from sexual misconduct is replaced with abstaining from sexual intercourse. None of the suttas explain this discrepancy, although, as Sutta 178 states, if you're incapable of celibate behavior, then at least don't transgress with the spouses of others. In other words, celibacy is ideal for the path. SN 4:7, Sutta 220 points out that in one who practices sexual intercourse, the teaching is muddled, but not so muddled that it prevents awakening, as witnessed by the large number of lay people who became arahants on listening to the Buddhist teachings. What is clear from these cases, though, is that awakening will not occur in the midst of sexual intercourse, regardless of what later traditions claim. Let me just look ahead here for a second, because as I continue to read, we're getting deeper and deeper and deeper into, the cultural intricacies of the time. So I am going to just hit the pause button here. If you are new to this podcast, and you might have very different feelings about this, and if you disapprove, I really do completely understand. I use AI to help me with this. I'm not a scholar. I'm not a monk. I've never been ordained. I will always say, please never use me as a teacher. This is in a way kind of a diary for me. As I've mentioned before in other episodes, it's just a way for me to kind of sort things out. And for me, Buddhism has been my kind of compass for many a moon. And so yeah, please don't, what New Pilgrim said or whatever, because I'm a chump, and there's definitely people who are much better suited. But I also hope that you'll, if you're really seriously interested in Buddhism, particularly, make some effort to see how far back you can go. All of it was written down much, much later, many hundreds of years, I believe, after Siddhartha Gautama died, and after he stopped teaching, which was an oral teaching, oral, whatever, I don't know, but I think of it as like the game of telephone. The further away we get from it, the more likely it is to be changed, co-opted, and renegotiated, usually for political ends. And that same can be said for the Bible, which I know has at least 40 authors, right? Some of which were kings, so we don't want to be naive about these things. Anyway, I am going to go and check out what Robot had to say about all of this, and then I'll come back and do my best to, share what I found out. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back, and it's several days later. Time. Okay, so right action, right out of the gate here, my mind immediately goes to, and I've heard that we've evolved to be this way, but then I immediately go to things that I can recall that were not this. And now that I'm older, I see how I caused harm. Do I feel ashamed of myself? No, I certainly went through that. I certainly did, go through feeling ashamed of myself. Why? Because I caused harm. When I was younger, and I want to be careful here because I'll just say when I was younger, I especially in the sexual misconduct realm, I was not wise. It's all holes barred here, so I'm in menopause now, and also just I've changed, I've become, my values have changed, but when I was a younger person, when I was in my 20s and even in my 30s, I was of course, men would call it sexually promiscuous because women aren't allowed to have sexual experiences, right? I know all you guys wouldn't say that, but there's certainly a lot of, I grew up at a time where I was considered sexually promiscuous. What I call myself is alive and fully embodying my sexual experience, and it was pretty fun. But I also engaged in sexual misconduct. So what do I mean by that? I don't know what the Buddha meant by that. I'm going to tell you what I mean by that. Back when I grew up, during my particular time, as a punk rocker and an early feminist, and somebody with an incredibly strong sex drive, which I have and I've always had, I didn't see any problem whatsoever with having all kinds of delightful sexual experiences, which I've had, with all kinds of wonderful, wonderful people, some women, which helped me to, sort out, who I was and what all was going on. I was never discouraged from exploring all that life had to offer. Some will agree, some will disagree. Whether or not you agree with me is, to a certain degree, irrelevant to me. Just like I hope that whatever I'm saying to you, to a certain degree, is irrelevant to you. So I have all kinds of weird feelings about sexual misconduct, because if I reflect back on the nature of my mind when I was engaging in harmful behavior, towards a man that I really loved, you know. I was a hot mess, but that wasn't their fault. It's not their fault that I was a hot mess. And so I think that, and again, I can't speak to other religions or other spiritual traditions, but I feel confident. I'm just going to say my opinion, and I'm going to say it confidently because it feels so true. Not that that means anything necessarily. I want to believe, I need to believe that all wisdom traditions have some way of relating with ethics and these ideas. And if not, I guess my question to them would be, why not? I can't take you seriously then. I'm sorry, I just can't. So now, you know, I'm much older, and the sexual misconduct thing is just not really, you know, within my hemisphere of reality. What I can say, and what I did learn how to do early days, when I realized that my mind, the nature of my mind, a way for me to work with sexual misconduct, and as someone who's not a monastic, but who is a layperson, what I can do and what I do, even to this day, is I nip it in the bud. And I've used that idea before because it's kind of how I roll. You know, it's just, you know, once you become aware of the behavior that is manifestly creating the dynamic in your life that isn't serving you or others, once you recognize it, well, then the rest becomes practice. You know, finding mechanisms, finding ways of working with that particular nature of your mind, of my mind, that is not kind, not compassionate, and that could be causing harm or suffering to others downstream. Of course, if we don't realize that's what's happening, then we don't realize that's what's happening. And I think that that's why I understand shame, and I'm also not a big fan of shame. Shame can be a trap. And I agree with Siddhartha Gautama, who later became the Buddha. And again, I have such a weird, just the whole idea of enlightenment kind of freaks me out, but I'm just going to talk about it like this. We can't know until we don't know, but once we know, it's on you, motherfucker, to get your shit together. And by the way, I'm talking to myself, right? I'm talking to all of us. So, right action, sexual misconduct. I don't watch porn. I used to when I was younger because it turned me on. I don't watch porn now because it quickly puts me into a relationship with what I'm watching. I can feel it happening, that suddenly I'm no longer watching a beautiful experience and a beautiful process, a communal experience. Instead of, it's almost like watching two dolls fucking. That's what it feels like. It feels so objectified, and I feel so disconnected from it that I may as well just be watching two fucking mannequins fuck. And as soon as I realize that that's what I'm experiencing, I'm no longer interested in watching porn. That's how I feel about sexual misconduct. Look, this isn't really a judgment on you if you're, you know, I'm just telling you how I work with this. And this is after 25 years of practice. This isn't a judgment, nor did Buddha judge it. There was no judgment. There's no judgment. Well, I don't know. Maybe, look, I've been looking at this stuff for a long time, but I ain't no expert. But my understanding is this is not about judging thyself. Recognize the behavior. Now, if you're continuing to choose to not acknowledge it, isn't that on you? I would argue, yes, knock it off. And if you're not knocking it off, then you really need to stop blaming external conditions for the predicament that you find yourself in. You helped create it, so stop participating in it. And this is kind of how I feel. So anyway, I'm way off the rails with sexual misconduct because this was just so, you know, I just think about my young adulthood and being a woman and how completely, totally not allowed women are to fuck everything that moves. And I did. I fucked everything that moved, and it was great. And it was just fabulous. And today I'm very happily married to someone who I love. I've never cheated on this person. It's all a process, right? And maybe that's not a thing for you. Maybe you don't struggle with a strong sex drive. Ooh, yeah, motherfucker. It was great fun. But because it was a drive. And there was a lot of other stuff caught up in it. You know, you listen to this, you can hear about my childhood and probably all kinds of, not probably, most assuredly, there was an entire gestalt underlaying all of that too. It wasn't all of it. The sex drive was very real. And the great pleasure that I have and took in sex is very real. But that stuff that was underneath it, that stuff that was underneath it, that was real too, you know. And now I hear that young people aren't having sex at all, and I don't know that I really have a response to that. You know, I can't fathom it. This isn't a judgment. It's just that I can't imagine not wanting to have it, because I wanted to have it all the time. Is that good? Is that bad? It certainly can create a lot of suffering, which is why it was and is a precept in Buddhism. So I get it, you know. Taking life. This is another one that's really, really tough for me. And, you know, and the Buddha is very, very clear on this, you know, and I know that we humans also can find a way to go to great lengths to avoid cognitive dissonance, myself included. I eat meat. I have some digestive issues because of decades of bulimia, which really, really gutted my gut. You know, it really, really seriously impeded my gut. And I've had lots of people, you know, try to intervene and give me their suggestions, and I greatly appreciate it. But, you know, I know my own body, and I've also have, you know, medical care that aligns with my approach. And, you know, I feel better when I eat a particular way, which means that I can behave better when I eat a particular way. So the idea of eating meat, right? I realize that this is a hot topic. I think you would have to be a science denier to not acknowledge that not every Homo sapien thrives on a vegan or vegetarian diet. You would, in fact, be denying science. This is not my opinion. It's a fact. You would be denying science if you tried to convince me or anyone else that every single human being on the planet would thrive on a vegan or vegetarian diet. Yes, lots of people thrive on a vegan or vegetarian diet. I know actually have a lot of people in my life who are vegetarians, and I have some beautiful people in my life as well who are vegan, and they're thriving. They're doing very, very well. And so there might be all kinds of judgments towards me as you're listening to this. If anyone's listening to this, maybe you'll never listen to this again because I told you that I eat meat. Well done, you. That's fine. That's fine. You know, I feel like this is why I find all of this so complicated, so complex. And by the same token, yesterday I carried a giant roach out of my house using a postcard in a glass. Yes, I realize that sounds insane, and yet here we all are, you know. So not taking a life. And this again is where I come into just incredible conflict with myself. For instance, if someone came into my home, and this is where I'm not Buddhist, you know, like the Buddha would not agree with this. Any Buddhist on this planet who's really, really practicing Buddhism would wholeheartedly not agree with this. If somebody came into my home and I had a child, which I don't, but if I had a child and somebody came into my home and tried to harm my child, I would slit their throat. Yeah. So taking life, you know, what does that mean? You know, so at the end of the day, am I Buddhist? I have no idea. I take Buddha's teachings, Siddhartha Gautama's teachings, and I realize that he comes from the Veda tradition. And I've read other books from the Veda tradition. It's just been about 20 years since I have. I don't know that I'm anything at all. I do know that I'm very earnest, though, about these teachings, which just means that I never let myself off the hook. Do I think that makes me better? Of course not. I think I'm a jackass, a moron. I have a terrible, terrible problem with passion, you know, that are constantly getting me into trouble. To my view, the best that I can do is I can hold all of these in my mind and be in dialogue with myself. And I find that the more that we do that, even when we don't want to do that, the more readily we can access shame, which to my view is a feeling that we should take active steps to get out of. And so how can I myself pull myself out of my own shame experience? Number one, I contemplate whether or not I'm right to feel shame. You know, I think especially if you do come from an environment or a childhood where you were shamed on the regular. So now you've been conditioned, right? Your fabricated conditioning is you believe, you are completely identified with this idea. I am nothing. I am worthless. I have nothing to offer. I am no thing. And when you're really identified, when you're identified with that in the egoic way, not the way that the Buddha was talking about, well, that'll just break you. And that's also means that it's going to take you right out of the game. And how can you be of service if you're out of the game? Don't you want to be of service? Anyway, stealing, Same thing. And, because I'm coming back a few days later, I honestly don't remember if this was this episode or the last episode, but it might have been this one. I don't know, because we're in right speech, we're in right action, and these are very rulesy. This is very much like here's behavior that would be considered something that you would absolutely want to avoid. And if you're a monastic, you're not allowed to engage in it. You don't have access to it in the monastic life. And if you're a lay person, it's tricky stuff. If you're serious, if you're not the kind of lay person that takes what they like and leave the rest, then, So, yeah, that's all I got for you, man. Right doesn't mean you're good or bad. You should be ashamed of yourself, or you shouldn't be ashamed of yourself. You're a piece of shit, or you're not a piece of shit. You deserve to be here, or you don't deserve to be here. Doesn't mean any of that. It's simply a definition. He's just telling you what is considered right speech, or in this case, right action, in the system called Buddhist psychology. It's like a recipe. So he's saying this is a minimal behavioral baseline. And yeah, I don't know what else to say about it, because I think that anybody who practices, again, I live in the West where it's mostly Zen from what I can tell. And I'm kind of a little bit more interested in Theravāda. I'm not really interested in the poetry and the koans and the intellectual. I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm just saying I'm more interested in the direct subjective experience that Siddhartha Gautama described, which is, I think, why I'm more drawn to Theravāda. And I don't really know much about Zen. It just was never really something that I pursued. But this stuff matters to me, And it probably matters to me a lot because of how much I violated all of these when I was younger. And again, I don't feel shame about it today at 54, but what I'm feeling even right now as I'm talking, it's just this groundswell of emotion, a great love for so many amazing men that I've had in my life. Because I was so open to my sexuality and because I was blessed with decent looks. It's a privilege. Yeah, and some of them I just harmed by engaging in sexual misconduct. Cheating on my partner was a thing that I did. If you're cheating on your partner, or you're in a relationship with someone who's in a relationship with someone else, and they haven't agreed to have an open relationship, and you're in distress, good. I mean, you're here listening to this, so all I can really say to that is good. Keep feeling that. Maybe it will motivate you to do better. Yeah. So I think I'm going to keep on reading. I really don't know what else to say about this. It's pretty straight. It's pretty cut and dry. And to my view, there's two ways that my rational human mind can choose to grapple with it. I can either create all kinds of really elaborate stories to help me make sure that I never feel any cognitive dissonance around my own bad behavior. That's one way I can handle it emotionally or cognitively. Or two, I can face myself directly, acknowledge when I've been a fucking asshole, look at it, and make a decision every day to do better, knowing that I'm never going to get it perfect, but at least that I woke up that day saying I'm going to do my best. It's better than nothing, isn't it? It's better than nothing. Because as if you go back and you look at the earlier sections of the book, or you read anything up on how Buddha trained his son, I think it's Raghu. No, I'm wrong. I'm close, but I'm not. That's not his name. But you'll find it. Just go see for yourself. But the way that he talked to his son, it was just so obvious. It was so logical. It's like we can have this whole inner dance and play going on, and because we're in the soup, we think it's normal, and we have zero idea. We have absolutely zero cognitive awareness that the other Homo sapiens around us, in which we are interacting with all the time, that they see our behavior. Like when I lose my temper or I say unkind things, there are other people around me that see that behavior in me. So it's very practical. People who see that in me are probably not, they're going to be less inclined to deal with me in the future. It's cause and effect. You take a life, you prepared for the consequences. You fuck around with someone's family, you ready for the consequences? You fucking around with your own family, are you ready for the consequences? You taking something that doesn't belong to you, You sure you're ready for the consequences? Just basic cause and effect. To me, it's very logical. Cause and effect. If you behave a certain way, this is going to happen. We can't be surprised. We cannot be surprised that our behavior elicits downstream effects. So anyway, can you tell I'm a little irritable today? I'm a little bit irritable. Yeah, I am. I admit it. I'm going to keep on reading. Let's do it. And I realized, boy, you know, as I look back to kind of see where I left off, I realized that I didn't really speak to much of anything specifically in this text. So I'm looking here at so I'll just do that before I go on, just to not be a complete jackass. Page 284. Yeah, and it's getting into sexual misconduct is defined as. And yeah, you know, again, this is 2026. So, you know, after a fashion, I feel that I did respond to this. Let's see, we got those who've taken a vow of celibacy, which that's never been a thing that I've been presented with, nor did I take one. Don't know anything about being a part of a king's harem, and that would just never happen. Well, it probably would have happened because I would have been forced into it back in those days, but today, you'd have to kill me first. What else here? Yeah, you know, I think that it ages well. You know, those crowned with flowers by another. And yeah, you know, to my knowledge, I never knowingly had sex with a man who was in a relationship, at least not knowingly. In other words, if they were, they lied to me about it. Told me it was over, etc., etc. But I cheated on partners. Yes, I did. Yeah, this ages well. Don't you think? If you're incapable of celibate behavior, then at least don't fool around with other people's partners, spouses. Celibacy as ideal for the path, and that makes a lot of sense. You know, there's so much in it. There is so much in sexual desire, and I recognize that every body is different, every mind is different, every conditioned, fabricated state is different. You know, maybe not everybody has a highly sexualized mind, like my mind mostly was. Yeah, that's all really calmed down as I've aged. And probably because I'm in menopause too, you know, so I don't know, I'm not a doctor, man. Anyway, yeah, you know, it makes sense that the Buddha would say, hey, you know, sexuality in general is its own very, very complex and titillating form of clinging. It's very, very, it's quite the siren song to anyone with a sexual appetite. So it makes a lot of sense to me. Guidance from right view. Right view provides guidance to right speech and right action on many levels. To begin with, it points to the importance of intention in determining the karmic consequences of your actions. This is why the definitions of wrong speech and wrong action apply only to acts done knowingly and deliberately. In describing the good and bad consequences of various actions, Sutta 82, Sutta 166, MN 135, right view also shows specifically why wrong speech and wrong actions are wrong, and why their right counterparts are right. It also warns of the synergy of bad karma. As Sutta 181 points out, if a person obsessed with gaining power wrongly inflicts punishments on others, he will then find it harder and harder to learn the truth, putting himself in a position where he removes himself further and further from the Dhamma. Right view, as we noted above, also teaches the principle that you harm others by getting them to engage in wrong conduct. For this reason, right speech and right action require that you not only refrain from wrong speech and wrong action yourself, but also that you refrain from getting others to engage in such behavior, and even from condoning them for engaging in it. So, for example, arguing that war can be morally justified, even if you don't participate in the killing yourself, would count as wrong action, as would a recommendation to others that in times of poverty they should steal from those who, in their eyes, are inappropriately wealthy. So none of this is a particularly popular view right now, right? And I think if you do listen to this at all, I talk about sometimes I keep a Substack as well. And I write about this periodically. You know, it's something that I find really fascinating. To my view, this particular passage right here in relationship to right action in particular can't help but to have political nuances to it. You know, and as I just mentioned, this Buddhist view here is not a popular view right now. So what do I mean by that? I think as I was reading this, what was coming to mind is really the political climate in the country in which I live, you know, here in the United States, where I am sitting right now. Although I moved around a lot, I moved around in the United States. I'm quite internationally not cosmopolitan. You know, I've only been to a couple of countries outside of the US. So I can only speak to my tin can. And it's so interesting. I just got off the phone having a conversation with someone, and they were saying some things that I didn't like, and I could feel myself clamping down on my idea of who I am. And so I tried to lovingly terminate the call. That's not how everybody deals with it, and all kinds of different versions of Western psychology maybe would tell me that's not how to handle it. Again, remember that I also come from 12-step programs, and lots of what I think is very wise recommendations from both that frame as well as Buddhism, which is to step away when in that state so as not to continue the proliferation of it, you know, for the sake of everybody. You know, right now, living in such polarizing times here in many, many, many parts of the world. And there's something that's just so delightfully, to my view, pragmatic and practical about the Buddha's idea of this relationship. You know, going back to earlier sections of the book. So we come into contact with something. If I was to use the conversation today that I just came out on the other side of, so I came into contact, right? I was sitting in my space, and then I reached out, and now I am communicating with another human, and so there is contact between us, you know, my sense gates and their sense gates, and in that contact, content arises, and I form a perception. So today, misunderstanding, feeling judgment, judging, feeling judged, could feel the grip, sort of the grip of this formation. It's hard to, if you practice some of this, at least my understanding, you start to notice this kind of rising up. And so I could feel this in my body, you know? I don't like what you're saying. That's not accurate. That's not, and then then noticing that I was responding, and then feeling bad about my response. And so then that was feeding my next response, and so on, and so on, and so on. Contact, perception, thinking, conceptual proliferation, papanka, conflict, which is exactly what happened. You know, the Buddha wasn't saying what's right or wrong. He was saying this is inevitable. This is a fact. We have contact, we form a perception about it, then we think about it, we ruminate, in my case, depending on the kind of mind that you have, doubling down on it, deepening, strengthening the perception, building papanka, conceptual proliferation, an identity, a fixed. And so when it becomes that entrenched, when it becomes identity and the attachment to that identity, conflict is inevitable. And, you know, I think about the world right now. I think about the world that lives on social media, for instance, which is a markedly different world, I might add, than the world that exists in the physical world. People that do a lot of social media don't realize that people that don't do social media exist. So we form identity, we build brands around it now. And then with that identity, we form views, personifications, avatars, whatever you want to call them. And now they become a part of that self. They become a part of the persona, part of the brand. And to fortify those views and to fortify that sense of self, we need others. You know, we need to form camps that agree with our views so as to avoid cognitive dissonance. So we have a reinforcement of our views, echoing back to us our own views, creating an ongoing loop that never ends. When you think about the history of Homo sapien, doesn't that sound about right? And so the Buddha says, speak what is true, speak what is beneficial, speak only when it's timely, and otherwise don't speak. And I've certainly participated in this, So if anybody does ever listen to this and they're thinking, man, this white chick is scolding me about, I participated in this. Oh man, when all the Epstein stuff came out, I absolutely caught myself on more than one occasion writing some snarky, unhelpful comment and then deleting it, realizing, I'm not going to put that out there. That's not necessary. So to my view, it's the more choppy the waves, the more, to my view, Homo sapien will revert, to evolutionary psychology. Just, look, man, I just want to survive. And when everything feels like your identity is threatened, that is where our formations of thought can come from. And that's kind of a dangerous place to be formulating thought from, this idea of justifying, harm for a cause. And the Buddha gives us a recipe that's pretty radical. We evaluate actions by the results. So is this action going to cause harm? Is this action going to cause harm to myself? Is this action going to cause harm to others? I'm thinking, I just applied for a job, and if you've been listening to this, I've been on the job market for a while, and it's tough out there, and do I feel fear? Absolutely. As I said, I'm not a spring chicken. Ageism does exist. I also have, I have things to offer. I do, and I know that as well. But yeah, I do. I feel fear. I get scared about my future. And it's so interesting to be coming here now because, I had this interview with an organization, and I don't want to name the name, but I knew immediately that it wouldn't be right livelihood. And I thought long and hard, about all of the ways that I could try to convince myself that it wouldn't be a violation of right livelihood, but I just really couldn't convince myself that it wouldn't be a violation of right livelihood. Again, right only within the context of Buddhism, which is what I chose. But I wanted to practice, the interview because interviewing is not really easy for me. I'm a little bit quirky and I'm a quirky person, so interviewing is tough for me. It's just tough. So, I took the interview and, it probably wasn't a good idea, but I told the recruiter, your mission statement, if what you say is true, then this is why I'm here applying for this job, because I believe in an end to war as well. At any rate, I didn't get the job, and I was really relieved because I knew that I would have to decline it, which fortunately was not a conversation that I wound up ever having to have with my husband, who is completely supporting us right now, and that makes me incredibly uncomfortable because I know that it is a real heavy lift for him, and I'm so grateful. But I didn't get the job, so I didn't have to have that conversation with anyone. But I guess I'm only telling this. This is such a weird episode, at least it is for me, but I guess I'm telling you this story just to say that I certainly don't think that I'm holier than you. I really don't. These are the kinds of conversations that we get to have with ourselves, and whoever the person is that gets that job, I'm not judging them. All I can really do is, I made a commitment, and okay, so this is a commitment that I made, and this is a clear violation of the commitment that I made. It's not making anybody right or wrong, including myself. It's just getting back to brass. Did you make the commitment? Yes. Even though I failed the commitment in all kinds of other ways. But this is the way that I'm able to continue doing my best with the commitment. I know it sounds like a great paradox because it is. So the Buddha also says that we don't encourage others to cause harm, nor do we approve of it. And I think, early days, I wrote a Substack post about what the Buddha might have to say about critical theory. And there's a lot of different critical theory. There's critical race theory, but, race is just one. I can't think of a word right now for it. One aspect of a human being that you could apply a critical lens to. Applying a critical lens to things is fantastic. But how we went about doing it, to my view, in the United States was moving into these areas here that the Buddha would suggest we really shouldn't be moving into. if we're practicing Buddhism, justifying harm for a cause. Earlier you heard me say, I might actually kill someone if they were standing over my child and I caught them in the middle of the night. Why do I say that? Because it might very well be true. I don't know. I don't have a child. I know my temper. I know my mind. I know it because I sit with it every day and just watch it. And, some people might hear this and think I never experience any kind of, quote unquote, heightened state of meditation. Of course I do, but don't make such a big deal out of it. If you sit long enough, you no longer care about stuff like that. That's just like part of the story. It's just part of the whatever, don't get too attached. Unless you're practicing something that, asks you to attach to it. But if you're studying Buddhism, then yeah, we're not doing that. I am so all over the place. So yeah, not encouraging it, not endorsing it. And the Buddha also warned that we shouldn't accept claims based on hearsay or authority. This to me is what made Buddhism so radical. Oh my gosh. This to me is what made him a true punk rocker. The Buddha was an early punk. He really got the spirit of punk. He was the first, well, maybe not, I'm sure it was the first. I don't know. I'm not a historian, but he was a punk rocker. Jesus Christ was a punk rocker, right? Anti-establishment. In both their cases, in very different routes and ways, in the pursuit of compassion, radical compassion. Don't accept claims based on hearsay or authority. Test for yourself. Test for harm. Test for harm. Earlier I said, in relationship, for instance, to sexual misconduct, so what would be an example of this testing for harm? We can be mindful. This is why right mindfulness is so key in the Eightfold Path. If we are always mindful, which is the idea, this is why we meditate. If we meditate, then what it does is it kind of is like learning how to tie your shoe. You do it enough and you don't have to think about it anymore. It just happens naturally. You're just mindful all the time. But it's the reason why it's so necessary is because if we weren't mindful all the time, then we wouldn't be able to have conversations with our mind like this one. Is this causing harm? But the lovely, beautiful thing about Buddhism also, and again, I don't speak, I'm never pitting Buddhism against any other religion, but I will defend Buddhism as its own valuable tradition. I only believe in universalism if it's a pluri-epistemological in its intent, rather than flattening everything in. Because you know what often happens when we flatten everything in? It usually looks like Christianity. And I realize that there's a lot of people, if anybody ever listens to this, that'll be like, yeah, that's because Christianity is true. Well, Christianity is true to you and to your identity, view, camp, ongoing conflict loop. We will continue as a species to kill each other until AI kills us or whatever goes down with that. As long as we continue to participate in this loop. To my view, if we can't get to a pluri-epistemological, and what do I mean by that? What a bullshit made up airy-fairy, look at her with her fancy new doctorate. If we can hold more than one ideas in our head at once, is it possible to say that Christianity is true and Catholicism is true and Hinduism is true and Islam is true? And I can't really imagine that we will ever come to that as a species. We'll absolutely annihilate each other first. Yes, you probably guessed I'm not particularly utopian, but maybe I'm wrong. I think about that show Pluribus. Would it be so awful to be AI's slave? I don't know if it's what Pluribus looks like. I don't know. Watch Pluribus and then do your own meditation on that. I don't have any solutions here. I'm an idiot, like I said. And I'm also going way off the rails per the usual. And I'm looking at the clock and the hour's almost up. And I know that I'm going to edit this, but I really want to keep on going. So I'm going to stop talking now and I'm going to keep on reading. Let's do it. It's because of this principle against getting others to engage in wrong action that even though abortion was legal in the Buddhist time, he forbade his monks and nuns from recommending abortion. The multi-lifetime perspective offered by Right View, along with its explanation that the results of actions sometimes take more than one lifetime to ripen, serves to remind you that even in times of difficulty and hardship, when it seems that holding to right speech and right action would put you at a disadvantage in terms of your wealth and survival, it's better to sacrifice your current well-being for the sake of long-term well-being, especially during times of hardship, when you're threatened with death. It's important to be mindful of 3 passages from the canon. 1, The Buddhist statement in Sutta 144 that loss in terms of relatives, wealth, and disease do not lead to rebirth in the lower realms, but that loss in terms of view and virtue do. 2. His statement that you protect yourself by following right action and right speech, Sutta 187, whereas if you steal and kill, you leave yourself unprotected. And 3. His statement that, in observing the principles of right speech and right action in all situations, you give universal safety to others, at least from your quarter, and will ultimately share in that universal safety yourself. And that comes from Sutta 81. These reflections show why rebirth is such an important part of the working hypothesis provided by mundane right view. Without this multi-life perspective, it's all too easy to rationalize engaging in wrong speech and action if you feel that your survival depends on it. With this perspective, you can maintain your resolve to stick with right speech and right action all the way to the end of life. So I don't really know that there is much more challenging content in Buddha's narrative than some of the ideas that we're getting to here. And before I speak to this, I want to go and I want to, look at trusted sites for me as a Western lay Buddhist. I'm not even going to hold for that plane, baby. I'm on a roll. Yeah, you know what? Nowadays, you won't even know there's a plane by the time I'm done editing this. Not because I'm good, because technology has it handled. Anyway, so as a woman who is also is well acquainted with sexual violence, not well acquainted. There's certainly people who've been much more well acquainted with it than I am, but I've had a brush with it. We're now getting into some pretty, not all women would agree with this, but from where I'm standing in my shoes, we're getting on some dangerous ground in terms of views and attachment to views. So even as I read that, I could feel within me, fuck Buddha, man, fucking man. So that was coming up. Fuck you, Buddha, fucking man, making decisions for me and my body. And so all of that was coming up. Great fodder to work with. And if you're offended, fantastic. Keep practicing. It was all coming up, and I'll tell you why in a second. But first I want to go and I want to check this out. Make sure that I'm really, again, I'm respectful of the teachings. Notice I didn't say the people, I said the teachings. So I want to make sure that I'm really respectful here in relationship to these ancient teachings and try to, get them as right as I can in relationship to what, we know about them. And then I'm going to tell you a little bit about my path in relationship to this. I lay it all out here. Like I said, this is a diary. This is a public diary. I enjoy it. I find it very helpful. At any rate, I'll be right back. And again, remember, I'm not a scholar. Okay, so please don't, this could be something that you listen to while you wash the dishes or don't listen to at all, right? It's just more content in the content trap. I'll be right back. Okay, so I'm back. And I want to preface my commentary here and my interaction with AI by saying that I will be talking about rape now. And I will be talking about sexual violence against humans, which there's a lot of things that fall into that category, sex trafficking, rape. What I decided to do today with AI in relationship to this sutta, and if you listen to my commentary as I read this book in past episodes, then you'll hear me talk about how I work with AI. I have lots of different methods and techniques that I use. It's never just a straightforward, here's the sutta, tell me what it means. It never looks like that. Usually when I go away, I'm gone for like an hour and then I come back after I've thought about it. Today, I decided to ask AI to respond to this sutta and to talk to me as if I was a 16-year-old girl in 2026 who had just been raped and impregnated by her rapist. So that gives you a little bit of a context for how I asked AI to talk to me about this ancient sutta. And I thought, rather than pick apart what this sutta means, you can go and you can look to people who are much more qualified than I to talk to you about what this sutta means. I'm going to tell you what AI had to say to me, the 16-year-old girl who just got impregnated via sexual violence, via a rapist. Here you go. Here's what Robot said. You're not at fault for what happened. In the Buddhist teachings, intention is what makes an action yours. You didn't choose this. The harm belongs to the person who hurt you. Start with what you can control right now, your own mind, and your next step. Number 1, stabilize yourself. Breathe slowly. Feel your body where it touches the chair on the floor. When the mind runs, bring it back to something simple. The breath, your hands, your feet. This is basic mindfulness. And yeah, when I say basic, I mean basic. That's basic mindfulness. And if you can do that right after you've been raped, then you probably are awake. Whatever the fuck that means. So of course, what Robot is saying here is totally absurd, and only a disembodied thing could give a response like that. But yeah, you know, if we're going to get to brass tactics here in terms of how to regulate oneself after you've been sexually violated, yeah, if you're a robot, a disembodied robot, sure. Going right to a embodied mindfulness practice would make sense to you because you have no nervous system. So that's how it started off. And obviously I'm going to say, well, that's absurd that you may or may not have access to that. You know, so we're going to skip over that part. And let's just get to what the brass tacks of, you know, Buddhism, what Buddha had to say from what we know about situations like this. And then I'll tell you, as I said, a little bit more about my story. So Buddha asks you to train, always. Don't add more harm if you can avoid it. And the early teachings explicitly say this. The early teachings explicitly say that ending a pregnancy is taking a life. You know, just like Christians. I would imagine Catholics. I don't know enough about Islam, but I would assume that Islamists might view abortion as taking a human life. I'm not telling you what I believe, I'm telling you what we have gleaned from early Buddhist teachings. Buddha also recognizes that this isn't something that the survivor chose. They're not at fault. They're not to blame. It's not their karma. And so what Robot says here in relationship to triangulating the Buddhist teachings and spitting out what it believes the Buddha was saying is that there's no easy decision here. It's hard no matter how you look at it. Because in Buddhism, it does all come back to intention, and it does all come back to harm. Am I causing harm? Am I mitigating harm? So what Robot said, and I'm assuming that Robot is taking these ancient teachings and doing its best to apply them to modern times. So here I'll read to you what Robot would have recommended to this 16-year-old girl. Get really accurate information. So go get medical help. Talk to people who are qualified to talk to you. They're safe, they're competent. Pay very, very close attention to what's driving your decision-making process. You know, and that's where the mindfulness comes in. And I know we haven't gotten to that yet. There's a reason why mindfulness doesn't appear in the Eightfold Path early on. It's much later. Usually it's presented much later. There's a reason for that. None of this was by accident. And give yourself a lot of space, a lot of room before deciding if you can. Here's what Robot says the Buddha would have said. Do not blame yourself. You had no part in this. Do not let other people force a decision on you. It is your karma. It is your decision to make. Do not pretend that it's simple, that it's just a simple solution because you are a Buddhist, because you're a Christian, because you're a this, because you're a that. There's nothing simple about it. Don't try to convince yourself that you should or shouldn't feel a particular way about it. There's no right or wrong way to feel about it. Life is suffering. But what you can do is you can act with care. You can think deeply about it. You can grant yourself a lot of compassion, which will help to provide that clarity from which you'll need if you really are committed to practices like these, which you'll need for you to feel good about your decision downstream. Keep training the mind. Whether you keep the baby, whether you abort the baby, you keep training the mind. So again, one of the many reasons why I love Buddhism is that he makes no claim of authority ever. And I would argue that if you're being told that you're being taught Buddhism and there's anyone making or stating that the Buddha made any claims of authority, I would argue that you're actually not being taught Buddhism at all. I'm not sure what you're being taught. Perhaps it was appropriated by some other religion or some other thing. I don't know or care, but it certainly isn't Buddhism. And if you're really interested in Buddhism, I would encourage you to disregard what they're saying and go see for yourself, just like the Buddha would say. Look, Siddhartha Gautama had an experience. I've had them as well. My experience, I'm sure, was different from his. Lots of people have experiences. He or she who seeks finds, and I found that to be true for myself. And I suspect that if you're legitimately serious about finding, you will too. And what he claimed to see is how suffering arises and what we can do about it in this life. And therein lies the Eightfold Path. So I had an abortion when I was really, really young. I was, I don't know, maybe 20, 21. I was addicted to drugs. Struggle with drug addiction off and on my whole life. Nowadays it's pot, but back in those days, well, it was never rough stuff, it was never like, not to say that, I'm not judging you. I'm just saying I never was kind of too afraid to try heroin or coke of any of those because I knew how addictive I was already, from childhood. I mean, man, I started binging and purging at the age of 10. That's around the time that I discovered Buddhism, when I aborted my child. According to Buddha, I will pay for that in the next life. Maybe he's right. What's so cool to me about Buddhism, and my understanding from the teachers that I've had from all over the US anyway, is that if Siddhartha Gautama, who later had an experience and became quote unquote enlightened, whatever the fuck that means, if I could sit down with him today, and have this conversation, I feel quite confident that I would never sense any form of judgment coming from him that wholly would have been outside of his perspective taking in relationship to reality. Possibly the only thing that I can think of that would savor of that today would be AI. Am I right or am I right? No, really, think about it. What else could you talk to that will not have an egoic arising occur in the mind? Even well-practiced practitioners like myself of 25 years can see when my own egoic mind springs into action. So I have this fantasy of a human foibled being called Siddhartha Gautama who had an experience and became Buddha and then became worshipped, and that's sad. It's just a person who had an experience and then taught. If you find that offensive, good, keep practicing. But I think this is a really tough one for women. Maybe not for you, especially if you're Christian, this may not be tough for you at all. You might have grown up in a really religious household, and so you actually never spent any time critically thinking or deliberating about these sorts of things. So you don't know how to do it now. Not a judgment, I'm just saying that's how the mind works. But if you do have a mind like mine, maybe you have aborted a child and now you're practicing these things. If you think there's an easy right answer, you're not Buddhist. Buddha had pretty clear views about it. I reckon when I'm dead, I'll find out. Until then, I won't know. But if you've had an abortion, I hope that you can stop beating yourself up now. And if you're in any kind of institutionalized religion that is encouraging you to flagellate yourself, to continue on in their little club, their group, their tribe, might you consider another tribe? A tribe that leads with compassion, that understands that it's not all this or all that. So I'm not a big fan of dualism or dualistic religions. It's much more complicated. It's nuanced. And all decisions deserve compassion, even when you're angry. So I'm over time, and I'm going to stop here. This is a weird episode for me. I don't know about you, but we're certainly in some very delicate territory for me. As someone who's battled with addiction throughout my life and had a very kind of volatile childhood in many ways, and religion is oftentimes for the privileged or the broken, and if you're coming at it from the broken side, then this podcast might make a little bit more sense to you. And if you're coming from the privileged side, it may not. But I stand by everything I said here. And if you're listening to all of this, thank you. I'm nuts. Thanks for being a part of it. And I hope you're well. I hope you're well. Be kind to yourself today and do better if you're not doing good. Take care. Bye.